The rhythmic hum of the coffee maker was the only sound filling the quiet kitchen as I flipped through the morning news on my tablet. It was an ordinary Wednesday morning, the kind that came with a predictable routine that I secretly cherished. The kids were upstairs, probably stalling their way through brushing their teeth, and Rachel was in the shower, the faint sound of running water trickling down the hall. I took a sip of my coffee, savoring the warmth that spread through me. There was a calmness in these early hours before the chaos of the day unfolded. Rachel's laughter floated in my mind as I thought about the quick joke she had cracked over breakfast yesterday. "You're too predictable," she had teased, her eyes sparkling as she plucked the exact same toast order I had every morning. Predictable. That was me, and I liked it that way. But today, something was off. It started with a message. My phone buzzed on the counter, pulling my attention away from the screen. Rachel's name flashed across the display. Odd. She never texted me from upstairs. The message was brief. "Don't forget to check the garage." I frowned, reading it again. The garage? What about the garage? "Rachel?" I called, craning my neck toward the hall. No response. The shower was still running. I tried to brush it off. Maybe it was nothing. A reminder about a chore I'd overlooked. A hint to move the toolbox I'd left in the middle of the floor last weekend. But her tone, something about the message was different. Rachel was playful by nature, her reminders usually paired with emojis or a winking face. This was short, plain. The buzzing started again before I could dwell on it, this time with an email notification. "Your Amazon order has shipped." That should have been another mundane part of my morning. But as I scanned the details of the order, my curiosity turned to confusion. A set of heavy-duty work gloves, industrial-grade cleaning supplies, and a collapsible shovel. What the hell? I muttered under my breath. The order was in Rachel's name, her account, her Prime membership. But why? Rachel wasn't exactly the gardening type. Our backyard was proof of that. And the cleaning supplies were more fit for a professional janitor than the occasional spring cleaning spree. I rubbed my temple and took another sip of coffee, telling myself it wasn't a big deal. Maybe she had some Pinterest project in mind, or maybe she'd volunteered for something at the school. But the questions lingered, gnawing at the edges of my thoughts. When Rachel finally came downstairs, she was dressed in her usual work attire. Simple, elegant, and perfectly polished. Her dark hair framed her face, still damp from the shower, and she smiled at me like nothing had changed. "Morning," she said, grabbing her travel mug from the counter. I hesitated, holding up my phone. "What's with the garage?" She glanced at me briefly, her expression unreadable. "Oh, just check it before you leave, okay? I left something there you might need for the weekend." "For the weekend?" I asked, setting my mug down. Rachel rolled her eyes in that playful way she always did when I pressed her for details. "Mark, just trust me. You'll see." She grabbed her purse, kissed me quickly on the cheek, and walked toward the door. And that was it. The moment she was gone, the house felt too quiet. I turned toward the garage door, her words echoing in my head. I hesitated. It was silly to feel anxious. This was Rachel, my wife, my partner for over a decade, the woman who joked about my toast habits and laughed at my bad puns. There was no reason to feel unsettled, but I did. Finally, I walked to the garage door, my heart thudding heavier than it should for such a simple task. The garage was dim, the single overhead bulb casting long shadows across the concrete floor. Everything looked normal at first glance. My workbench, the kids' bikes, the half-empty cans of paint stacked neatly on the shelves. But as my eyes scanned the space, they stopped on a brown box sitting near the door, taped shut with duct tape. The box wasn't large, maybe the size of a small microwave. It had no markings, no label, nothing to indicate where it had come from or what it held. I crouched down, running my hand over the rough tape, and something inside me resisted the urge to open it. The sound of Rachel's voice replayed in my head. "You'll see." What the hell is going on? I muttered. The box was surprisingly light when I lifted it, and the contents shifted faintly inside. I turned it over in my hands, looking for any clues, but found none. Setting it back down, I stood there for a moment, hands on my hips, staring at the thing like it might give me an answer. The sound of Emily's voice upstairs snapped me out of my thoughts. "Dad, I can't find my backpack." "Check your closet," I called back, shaking my head. I closed the garage door behind me, leaving the box untouched for now. But the feeling of unease stayed with me as I wrangled the kids through breakfast and out the door. On my drive to work, I replayed the morning over and over. Rachel's message, the strange Amazon order, the box. None of it made sense, but it all felt connected somehow. When I pulled into the office parking lot, my phone buzzed again. Another message from Rachel. "Did you check it?" This time, the pit in my stomach didn't just twist, it sank. I stared at the message for a long moment, my mind racing. Why did she care so much about the garage? Why did this feel so deliberate? For the first time in years, I felt a small, nagging crack in the foundation of my trust. Rachel had always been honest with me, transparent. We weren't perfect, but we were solid, or so I'd thought. But now, I wasn't so sure. I typed a quick reply, "Not yet. What's in it?" Her response came almost immediately, "You'll see." The words were simple, but they carried a weight I couldn't shake. I sat in my car, staring at the screen, 1,000 questions swirling in my mind. What was she hiding? Why now? And why did it feel like everything I thought I knew was about to change? The rest of my workday blurred together, my mind constantly drifting back to Rachel's cryptic messages and the box in the garage. I tried to bury myself in emails and deadlines, but her voice lingered in my head, "You'll see." The weight of those words gnawed at me, along with the question I couldn't shake. Who was Rachel when I wasn't looking? When I got home, the usual post-school chaos greeted me. Emily was on the living room rug, coloring furiously, her tongue sticking out in concentration. Dylan was glued to his tablet, the sound of explosions and heroic theme music filling the air. Their energy was comforting, grounding, even. Rachel was in the kitchen, stirring something on the stove. She glanced over her shoulder when I walked in, offering a smile so warm, so familiar, that for a moment, all my suspicions felt ridiculous. "Hey you," she said brightly. "How was work?" "Same as always," I replied, trying to match her tone. "What's for dinner?" "Pasta and meatballs," she said with a casual shrug. Quick and easy. Her demeanor seemed flawless, too flawless. I opened my mouth to ask about the box, but stopped myself. What if I was overreacting? What if this was all in my head? I poured myself a glass of water, pretending not to notice the way she avoided eye contact as she hummed a tune under her breath. Later that night, as Rachel folded laundry on the bed, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. A name I didn't recognize flashed across the screen, Brad. "Who's Brad?" I asked, keeping my voice light, casual. Rachel didn't miss a beat. "Oh, Brad from next door," she said, folding a shirt with practiced ease. "He's asking about the patio measurements. Remember, we talked about redoing it?" I nodded slowly, trying to recall the conversation. Maybe we had talked about it. Or maybe she'd mentioned it in passing, and I dismissed it. Her explanation felt plausible, but something in her tone made my stomach tighten. The next morning, Rachel left for work earlier than usual. "We have a team meeting," she explained, slipping on her heels. "You're all dressed up for a meeting," I teased, noting the perfume she rarely wore outside of date nights. She laughed lightly, almost too lightly. "First impressions matter," she said with a wink, grabbing her purse. Her laugh lingered in the air, thin and brittle. As the door closed behind her, I stared at the spot where she just stood, unease creeping in like a shadow I couldn't shake. By mid-morning, I gave in to curiosity. The box was still in the garage, untouched. Grabbing a utility knife, I carefully sliced through the duct tape. My breath hitched as I opened it. Inside were a pair of men's running shoes. They weren't mine. The soles were caked with dried mud, and a crumpled receipt was tucked inside one of them. I unfolded it with trembling hands. Dated 2 weeks ago, it listed a purchase from a sports store across town. The name on the receipt wasn't Rachel's. It was Brad's. My chest tightened as I stared at it, my mind scrambling for answers. Why were Brad's shoes in my garage? And why hadn't Rachel mentioned them? I shoved the box back into its corner just as Emily called for me from the kitchen. "Dad, I can't find my backpack." That evening, Rachel was unusually animated, filling the silence with stories from work. Her laughter was louder, her gestures more exaggerated. She was trying too hard. As we sat down for dinner, I finally spoke. "I found that box in the garage," I said, keeping my eyes on her. She froze for a fraction of a second, her fork hovering over her plate. Then she smiled, too brightly. "Oh, right. That's Brad's. He left them here when he came by to look at the patio last week." "Left his shoes?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. She shrugged, her tone breezy. "He stepped in something outside and didn't want to track it into the house." Her explanation sounded reasonable, but the way she said it felt rehearsed. I didn't press her further, but the knot in my stomach tightened. The next day, I left work early, unable to focus. When I pulled into the driveway, my heart sank. Brad's truck was parked at the curb. Inside the house, it was eerily quiet. The kids were at school, and Rachel's car was in the driveway, but there was no sign of her downstairs. "Rachel?" I called, my voice echoing through the silence. No response. As I climbed the stairs, I heard faint voices coming from the bedroom. My heart pounded as I approached, the door slightly ajar. Through the gap, I saw Rachel sitting on the edge of the bed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Brad stood in front of her, his posture tense, his voice low and urgent. I couldn't make out the words, but their body language spoke volumes. Rachel's expression, a mix of guilt and unease, was a look I'd never seen before. "I told you, this is getting too risky," Brad said, his voice just loud enough for me to catch. Rachel glanced toward the door, as if sensing my presence, and I stepped back quickly, retreating down the hall before they could see me. My chest felt like it was caving in, anger and betrayal warring with the hope that I'd misunderstood. But the pieces were falling into place, and they painted a picture I didn't want to see. I left the house before they could notice me, my mind racing. My life, the life I thought I knew, was unraveling before my eyes. And the worst part was, I had no idea what I was going to do next. The air between Rachel and me shifted after that afternoon. Conversations turned stilted, every word carefully chosen, as though we were both walking a tightrope, afraid of what might break beneath us. I wanted to confront her, to demand answers, but the fear of what I might uncover kept my mouth shut. Instead, I carried my doubts like an invisible weight, heavier with each passing glance, every half-hearted smile, every laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Daddy, can we go to the park after dinner?" Emily's voice pulled me from my spiraling thoughts as we sat at the dinner table that night. "Sure, sweetheart," I said, forcing a smile. Rachel smiled too, but hers was tight, mechanical. She excused herself after dinner, retreating to her office under the guise of catching up on emails. Left alone, I slipped into the garage. The box was still there, sitting in the same spot, mocking me. I opened it again, staring at Brad's shoes as if they might offer answers. They didn't, of course. Why were they here? Why had Rachel been so quick to brush off my questions? The memory of her explanation replayed in my head. Too smooth, too practiced. Let it go, I told myself. But the words felt hollow. That night, I called my best friend, Mike, the one person I trusted to tell me the truth, even if I didn't want to hear it. "Hey man," I said when he answered. "Mark? You sound off. What's going on?" I hesitated, then let it spill. The cryptic messages, the box in the garage, the photo. Each detail tumbled out of me like stones into a quiet pond, disturbing the surface with their weight. Mike didn't respond right away. "That's a lot," he finally said, his voice cautious. "I know, but what if I'm overthinking? What if this is all in my head? And what if it's not?" Mike countered. "Mark, I'm not saying you jump to conclusions, but you can't keep sitting on this. You're torturing yourself." His words landed heavy. I knew he was right. Something had to give. The next morning, I waited until Rachel left for errands. My resolve hardened as I returned to the garage. This time, I wasn't stopping at the shoes. I dug deeper, my fingers brushing against something wedged beneath them, a folded piece of paper. I unfolded it with trembling hands. A receipt, dated 3 weeks ago, from a motel just outside town. Room 203. My breath caught in my throat. The name on the receipt wasn't Rachel's, but I didn't need it to be. My mind filled in the blanks too easily. I drove to the motel that afternoon, the crumpled receipt in my pocket like a burning brand. The building was worse than I'd imagined. Peeling paint, flickering neon, and the stale scent of mildew. I pushed open the door to the front desk, a bell jangling above me. The clerk looked up lazily from behind the counter. "Need a room?" "No," I said, my voice tight. "I'm looking for information about a guest. Room 203, about 3 weeks ago." He frowned. "We don't give out that kind of info. I just need to know if a guy named Brad was here." I pressed, my desperation clear. "It's important." The clerk sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Look, man, I don't know every guest. Try someone else." Defeated, I left the motel, my mind a mess of dead ends and unanswered questions. If nothing else, the receipt confirmed something was wrong. I just didn't know how much. That evening, Rachel was quieter than usual, her gaze flicking to me and then away. It was as if she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. "Everything okay?" I asked finally, breaking the silence. "Yeah," she said quickly, too quickly. "Just tired." Her answer was unconvincing, but I let it go. For now. After dinner, as Rachel tucked the kids into bed, I sat in the living room, my thoughts spiraling. Her phone lay on the counter, just within reach. The urge to look was overwhelming. I'd never crossed that line before, but fear of the unknown had a way of pushing boundaries. Her messages with Brad were innocent, mentions of patio plans and schedules. Yet the fact that his name kept appearing at all felt like a slap in the face. Then I found it, a hidden album in her gallery. My heart raced as I opened it, revealing a single photo. It was her and Brad, standing close, too close. His arm rested on her shoulder, their smiles too intimate. She was wearing the dress, the one from the day I'd seen them in the bedroom. My stomach churned. This wasn't just friendly. It was something more. When Rachel came downstairs, I didn't confront her. Not yet. My emotions were raw, my thoughts tangled. Instead, I grabbed my keys and drove to Mike's house. "You're here late," he said, surprised when he opened the door. "I need to talk," I said, my voice tight. We sat on his porch, the night air heavy with unspoken words. I told him everything, about the receipt, the photo, the unanswered questions. Mike listened quietly, his expression darkening. "Mark," he said when I finished, "you can't keep avoiding this. You need to confront her." "I don't know if I can," I admitted, my voice breaking. "What if I'm wrong?" "And what if you're not?" Mike said firmly. "You need to know." When I returned home, Rachel was still awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of wine. She looked up when I walked in, her eyes wary. "You're home late," she said softly. I sat across from her, my heart pounding. "Rachel," I began, my voice steady but strained, "I need you to tell me the truth. About you and Brad." Her expression shifted, fear, surprise, and guilt flashing across her face. I don't know what you mean," she said, her voice trembling. I placed my phone on the table, the photo open. "I know something's going on," I said quietly. Her eyes filled with tears, and she looked away. "Mark, it's not what you think." "Then what is it?" I pressed, leaning forward. "Because right now, it looks exactly like what I think." Her answer came slowly, reluctantly. "It's complicated," she whispered, the word hanging in the air like a dagger. The room fell silent, the weight of her admission crushing the space between us. And in that silence, I knew one thing for certain. Whatever came next, our lives would never be the same. The tension between Rachel and me had become unbearable, like a silent storm building just beneath the surface. Her reassurances echoed in my mind, but they failed to settle the growing unease. Every smile she gave felt calculated, every explanation too convenient. I couldn't ignore it any longer. I needed clarity, answers, and I knew exactly where to start. That afternoon, I sat in my car and called Brad. My fingers hovered over the screen for a moment before pressing the call button. The phone rang twice before he picked up. "Hey, Mark," he said, his tone casual but with an edge of surprise. "What's going on?" "Not much," I replied, keeping my voice steady. Just wanted to touch base about the patio. Rachel mentioned you've been helping with some plans? There was a brief pause. Oh, yeah, Brad said, his voice calm but a little too deliberate. She's been bouncing ideas off me. You know, trying to get everything perfect. I pressed on. Anything specific I should know about? He hesitated, the pause stretching uncomfortably long. Well, she's been looking at custom wood for the deck. Real high-quality stuff. It's a bit pricey, but she's committed to making it special. Custom wood? That was news to me. She didn't mention that, I said, my tone measured. What else has she been thinking? Brad let out a nervous chuckle. Oh, just the usual design tweaks. Honestly, Mark, Rachel's been handling most of it. She's got a real vision for this. I tightened my grip on the phone. Sounds like you two have been spending a lot of time on this. Well, yeah, but only for the plans, he said quickly. Nothing more than that. His tone betrayed him. It was too smooth, too eager to close the subject. Good to know, I said coolly. Thanks for filling me in. Of course. Let me know if there's anything else I can help with, Brad added, almost too quickly. I hung up, staring at the dashboard. The conversation hadn't provided concrete answers, but his hesitation, his overly rehearsed tone, it all felt wrong. When I got home, Rachel was in the backyard, her phone in hand. She was typing quickly, her expression focused, but when she saw me, she immediately locked the screen and slipped the phone into her pocket. Hey, she said brightly, her smile a little too big. How was your day? Fine, I replied, watching her closely. Who were you texting? Oh, just Brad, she said, waving it off. He's sending over some wood samples for the patio. I nodded slowly, her words sinking in. He mentioned that. Funny you didn't bring it up before. She blinked, caught off guard for just a moment before recovering. Well, I was going to, but you've been so busy lately. I didn't want to bother you with the details. Her smile didn't reach her eyes, and a flicker of doubt sparked in her expression. I nodded again but said nothing more, walking past her into the house. 2 days later, I found the piece that shattered the fragile peace I'd been clinging to. I was cleaning out the trunk of Rachel's car, clearing away reusable grocery bags and jackets, when something caught my eye, a small velvet pouch tucked beneath the pile. I pulled it out, my pulse quickening as I opened it. Inside was a delicate gold necklace with a heart-shaped pendant. It was understated but beautiful, something I would have bought Rachel for a special occasion, but I hadn't. A folded note was tucked inside. My hands shook as I unfolded it, reading the words scrawled in neat handwriting. You mean everything to me. I can't wait for the next time. B. The ground felt like it was slipping away beneath me. My chest tightened, and my breath came in short gasps. I stood there, frozen, the necklace dangling from my fingers, the note burning into my memory. Mark. Rachel's voice startled me. I turned to see her standing in the driveway, her face pale as her eyes darted to the pouch in my hand. What's that? She asked, her voice tight. I held up the necklace and note, my anger barely contained. You tell me. Her lips parted, but no words came out. She looked at the note, then back at me, her face flushing. It's not what you think, she said finally, her voice trembling. Then what is it? I demanded, my voice rising. Rachel swallowed hard, taking a step toward me. It's a gift for someone else. Brad's wife. He asked me to pick it up for him as a favor. The explanation was so ridiculous, so painfully desperate, that I almost laughed. You expect me to believe that? It's the truth, she said, her voice breaking. I know it looks bad, but I swear, Mark, it's nothing. You're overreacting. I stared at her, the storm of betrayal and fury building inside me. I've given you every chance to tell me the truth, Rachel. Every chance. And this is what I get. Her eyes filled with tears, and she reached for me, her hands trembling. Mark, please. Let me explain. I stepped back, shaking my head. No, I've heard enough. Her expression crumbled, her tears spilling over, but I couldn't bring myself to care. The weight of her betrayal pressed down on me like an iron vice. Without another word, I turned and walked away, leaving Rachel standing in the driveway. Whatever excuses she had, whatever explanations she might have offered, they didn't matter anymore. The truth was clear, and it was enough to break me. Rachel's expression, so full of desperation and fear, haunted me as I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping me grounded. The velvet pouch and damning note lay on the passenger seat, staring back at me like accusations. The evidence seemed clear. Rachel had betrayed me. But her face, God, her face. It wasn't just the look of someone caught in a lie. It was fear, raw and visceral, like she was terrified of something deeper, something I still didn't understand. I couldn't drive away. Instead, I found myself sitting there, staring at the house, replaying every interaction over the past few weeks, every clue, every odd behavior. What had she been hiding? And why? Finally, I pushed open the car door and walked back inside. The house was eerily silent. Rachel was in the living room, sitting on the edge of the couch, her head in her hands. When she looked up, her eyes were red and puffy, her face pale. "Mark," she began, her voice trembling. "Don't," I said, holding up a hand. "No more excuses. No more lies. I want the truth, Rachel. All of it. Right now." She nodded slowly, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "You're right," she whispered. "You deserve the truth." I crossed my arms, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might break my ribs. "So tell me, what's going on between you and Brad?" Rachel hesitated, her gaze dropping to her lap. "It's complicated." I let out a bitter laugh. "Stop saying that. Just tell me." She looked up, her eyes glistening with fresh tears. "I didn't sleep with him, Mark. I swear to you. It's not what you think." Her words hit me like a blow. Of all the scenarios I'd imagined, that wasn't one of them. "Then what is it?" I demanded. Rachel drew a shaky breath, her hands fidgeting. "Brad's been helping me with something personal, something I didn't want to involve you in because I thought I could handle it on my own." "What does that even mean?" "It's about my mother," she said quietly, her voice breaking. I froze. Rachel almost never talked about her mother, the woman who had abandoned her family when she was a teenager. It was a wound she never touched, let alone shared. "What about her?" I asked cautiously. Rachel swallowed hard. "She contacted me a few months ago, out of the blue. She said she was in trouble and needed money." A knot formed in my stomach. "And you didn't tell me?" "I didn't want to drag you into it," she said, her voice cracking. "I thought I could fix it myself. Why would you even consider helping her after everything she's done to you?" I demanded. Rachel looked away, guilt etched across her face. "Because she's still my mother. And she said she'd changed, that she wanted to make things right." I wanted to believe her. I sat down heavily, trying to process what she was saying. What does Brad have to do with this? When she first contacted me, she was in his hometown. I didn't want to go alone, and I didn't want to tell you, so I asked him to come with me. He drove me to meet her. That's when things got messy. What happened? Rachel hesitated, her voice dropping. She wasn't trying to make amends. She wanted money, a lot of it. She said if I didn't pay her, she'd tell you lies about me, that I'd been unfaithful. My chest tightened. "Why didn't you tell me?" Rachel wiped her eyes again. "I was scared. I thought I could pay her off and make her go away, but it only made things worse." She kept coming back, demanding more. "And the necklace?" I asked, my voice hard. "She left it at the motel where I met her," Rachel said, her voice trembling. "She called it a peace offering, but I didn't trust it. I didn't know what to do with it, so I hid it." I stared at her, trying to make sense of it all. Her story fit, but it didn't erase the weeks of secrecy, the lies, the pain. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked, my voice raw. "Because I didn't want you to think I'd betrayed you," she said, her voice breaking. I stood, pacing the room as her words settled over me. They made sense, too much sense. But the damage was done. "I don't know if I can believe you," I said finally, exhaustion creeping into my voice. Rachel stood too, crossing the room to face me. "I'll prove it," she said, her voice fierce. "I'll show you the messages, the transfers, everything." Her desperation was real, but so was my pain. I need time, I said, stepping back. Rachel nodded, tears streaming down her face. Take all the time you need. The next morning, I went to Mike's house and told him everything. It sounds like she's telling the truth, he said, his expression serious. But you need to decide if you can move past it. I don't know, I admitted. When I got home, Rachel was waiting with a folder in her hands. Inside were emails, bank statements, and a letter from her mother. It was all there, laid bare. I'm sorry, Mark, she said. For everything. I nodded slowly. It's going to take time. I understand, she whispered. And for the first time in weeks, I felt a fragile hope, a beginning. But nothing would ever be the same. Rachel's expression as she handed me the folder stayed with me long after I had gone through its contents. The printed emails, bank statements, and even a letter from her mother seemed to line up perfectly with her story. On the surface, it was all there, proof of her innocence. But something still didn't sit right. That night, as Rachel lay beside me, I couldn't sleep. Her explanations made sense, and yet the small inconsistencies nagged at me. Brad's awkward pauses, Rachel's initial defensiveness, and most of all, the necklace with the note. It all felt too conveniently explained away. By morning, I made a decision. I wasn't ready to confront Rachel again, but I couldn't let this go. If she was truly innocent, I'd owe her an apology. If she wasn't, I had to know. I reached out to Brad. This time, I wasn't going to dance around the subject. Brad, I said bluntly when he answered, I need the truth. What's really going on between you and Rachel? There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Mark, I don't think I'm the right person to. Don't, I snapped, my voice rising. Don't dodge the question. I already know something's going on. I just want to hear it from you. Another pause, this one heavier. When Brad finally spoke, his voice was quiet. It wasn't supposed to happen, he said. It was a mistake. The words hit me like a physical blow. Are you saying you and Rachel? Yes, he interrupted, his tone sharp, almost offensive. But it wasn't what you think. It wasn't some big affair. It was one night. That's it. I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. One night? When? About a month ago, Brad said reluctantly. It was after one of those trips she mentioned. She was upset about her mom, and one thing led to another. I could barely process his words. You betrayed me. Both of you. Mark, I'm sorry, Brad said, his voice breaking. It was a mistake, and I regret it every damn day. She told me it was over, that she loved you and wanted to fix things. I didn't say anything because I didn't want to ruin your family. My laughter was bitter and hollow. You didn't want to ruin my family? You already did. I hung up before he could respond, my hands trembling with rage and heartbreak. The man I had trusted, the woman I had loved, they had both destroyed everything. When I returned home, Rachel was in the kitchen, smiling faintly as she sipped her coffee. That smile, so practiced and serene, only fueled my anger. I placed my keys on the counter with deliberate force, and her smile faltered. Mark, she asked cautiously. We need to talk, I said, my voice cold. Her face paled. What's wrong? Brad told me everything. Rachel's coffee cup slipped from her hands, shattering on the floor. She stared at me, her eyes wide with panic. Mark, I can explain. Don't, I said sharply, cutting her off. Don't lie to me again. I gave you every chance to tell me the truth, and you chose to hide it. Tears filled her eyes as she stepped closer, her hands trembling. It was a mistake. It didn't mean anything. I was scared. I was weak. You were selfish, I said, my voice shaking with anger. You didn't think about me, about our kids. You only thought about yourself. Rachel sobbed, reaching for me, but I stepped back. Mark, please. I love you. I'll do anything to make this right. There's no making this right, I said quietly. You can't undo what you've done. The weight of her betrayal crushed me. For weeks, I had doubted myself, questioned my sanity, even believed her lies. And now, the truth stood between us like an unbridgeable chasm. I'm done, I said finally, the words heavy but certain. I can't stay in this. Not after this. Rachel crumpled to the floor, her sobs echoing through the house. I turned away, my heart breaking even as I walked out the door. The next few weeks were a blur. I filed for separation, packed my things, and moved into a small apartment across town. The kids stayed with Rachel most of the time, though I made every effort to see them as much as I could. Rachel tried to reach out, leaving messages and sending emails, but I ignored them. My heart was too broken, my trust too shattered. Whatever we had was gone, destroyed by a single, selfish act. One night, as I sat in my empty apartment, I found myself scrolling through old photos, family vacations, holidays, the early days of our marriage. The smiles felt like a cruel reminder of what I'd lost, of the life I thought we had. But amidst the pain, I found clarity. Rachel's betrayal had broken me, but it wouldn't define me. I had my kids, my integrity, and a chance to rebuild my life. And that was enough.